everybody, in this video I'm going to walk you through an exercise that I gave to one of my coaching tier posture squad members last night. So this posture squad member had very cleverly identified that getting her right foot cramping took away her right hip, her right pelvic, her right shoulder and her right knee pain. But the exercises that she was trying to do where she was cramping her right foot, a lot of them involved her hip being in flexion. So this position here at my hip joint is a position of hip flexion, and this position here at my hip joint is one of extension. So in our coaching tier session last night, I gave her a couple of exercises that not only involved getting her cramping her foot, but also keeping her hip in extension, because that was what her body seemed to want the most. Because of that, I ended up making up an exercise a bit on the spot that suited her body and gave us the outcome that we wanted, and that's what I'm going to walk you through here. I haven't made a name for this one yet, but I think I'm just going to call it an upright kneeling plantarflexion exercise, which will make sense in a second. You're going to need something that you're going to kind of lean on with your hands. I've got this chair, but that could be really anything. And I've also got a yoga block, which is going to help me with the alignment of my feet, just to enable me to get the best plantarflexion at my feet that I possibly can. So what we're going to do is bring ourselves to this type of position, and I'm going to put the block the medium way around like this in between my feet. So that's keeping my feet, my knees and my hips at about hip width apart. When I come up like this, what I'm going to be really cautious of is that my pelvis doesn't start moving backwards. So when your pelvis is moving backwards like this, you're not putting your hip in that really open position of hip extension, which is what we want for the purpose of this exercise. But conversely, you've also got to be careful about sort of pushing yourself too far forwards in the pelvis and then lifting your rib cage up. So if you notice that you're doing this and you're tilting your rib cage upwards, what you're doing is you're hyperextending your lower back into extension and you're bypassing the extension of your hip. So if your hips struggle with extension, you will find that you probably either want to do this or that you want to do this and lift up your rib cage. So we've got to make sure that our rib cage is down. Can you see the difference there in my lower back position? It's much less compressed, and this is going to force my glutes and hamstrings to wake up more. They are the kind of main hip extensors, so they're going to switch on to help keep this hip position open. If I allow my rib cage to bail up like this, I basically switch these guys off and I go into my lower back and compensate. So as somebody with an anterior pelvic tilt, that's very much what my body is going to naturally want me to do. So I am having to kind of choose to take myself out of that natural response from my body. So we are here. We're keeping the pelvis above the hips, but we're not lifting the rib cage up. We are trying to keep the tops of our feet, our ankles and our shins on the floor. So this position here that you can see at my foot is a position of plantarflexion. If your feet struggle to plantarflex, you are probably going to notice that you do this, or that you take your ankles wider than your toes. So what we're trying to do here is use the block as a guide, and we're keeping, I might just quickly change the angle here, I'm keeping the angle of my feet so that my big toes, the inner edges of my feet and my ankles are touching the block. So I'm not doing this and I'm not doing this, although I think it'd be quite unlikely for you to want to do this. We're keeping the feet straight. And by keeping the feet straight, that is where we achieve plantarflexion. If the ankles roll out to the side, you are in some plantarflexion, but you're also supinating the ankle as well. And we're just going to stay here for a minute, because this is pretty much what I gave to my client. I just had her in this position for a couple of minutes, And all I wanted her to do was try and get the arches of her feet cramping, because I wanted her to achieve the plantarflexion at her feet. The way that we knew that she was achieving plantarflexion at her feet was because the arches of her feet cramped, and when that happened, it really switched on new muscles through her legs, which took away her symptoms of pain elsewhere in her body. So here with the block, I am not using the block between my feet. I'm not pushing the block in between my feet. I'm not doing anything. I'm simply using it as a guideline. I'm pointing my feet, so I'm choosing to kind of crunch my toes up off the floor in order to contract the arches of my feet and lengthen the fronts of my feet, the fronts of my ankles and my shins. So I'm really focusing on squeezing the arches of the feet, trying to get them waking up. But my main focus is just keeping that connection from big toe, middle edges of the foot into the ankle, so there's no like twisting and rotating at the hips. The longer that I stay here, what I notice is that my glutes are switching on and my hamstrings are switching on, but I'm not consciously squeezing my butt. So I am not gripping my bum using my brain. My bum is actually just kind of automatically gripping because of what I'm doing at my feet. Both the pointing of the feet and a sort of pushing down onto the feet to push the pelvis forwards is helping to stimulate this posterior chain of muscles. So the calves, the hamstrings, and the glutes, which are all involved in hip extension. It's why the shoes that we wear are so important, because if we are wearing shoes that dramatically alter the natural gait of a human being, so if you're wearing kind of trainers that are higher at the back than they are at the front, if you're wearing any shoe that is higher at the back than it is at the front, a shoe with a really thick sole, a shoe with lots of padding, a shoe with like insoles, that type of thing, it basically switches off this communication system from our feet further upstream in our body. So we're starting to remedy that by doing this exercise. And this was literally all I did. I just had her standing here, or kneeling here, sorry, for a few minutes, really squeezing her feet, trying to get the arches of her feet cramping as much as she could without the feet spinning off to the side and without that rib cage lifting up. So we want your belly to not be longer, shall we say. That's longer here at the front than it is at the back. We want the relationship between the belly and the lower back to be about the same. Just holding it, glutes and hamstrings waking up, giving you hip extension, feet in plantarflexion. And if you liked that exercise and benefited from it, I also recommend having a look at kneeling ankle squeezes. Incredibly similar exercise, using the block in between your feet, but you'd probably have the block slightly further up. And that is going to be more actively working your hips into external rotation at the same time. It's a great exercise for me to do, but we're just keeping things slightly more simple today, just with the foot cramp that I want you to go after in that position. Enjoy.